بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Yesterday we got through the first uh, four lines uh, of the novel, of the poem, and we got through the Sahih Hadith and nothing else. And today we're going to begin with the Hasan. And so he says, رحمه الله والحسن المعروف طرق وغدت رجاله لا كالصحيح اشتهرت. So the Hasan Hadith, the word Hasan in the Arabic language means good. Last time we said that the word Sahih, uh, linguistically, it means something that is healthy. Al-Hasan means something that is good. And it is of a lower level than the Sahih Hadith. However, in terms of treating them, we treat them the same. So the same way that we take rulings from a Sahih Hadith, we take rulings from a Hasan Hadith. So they are treated the same, but there is a small difference between how they are defined. Now, the Hasan Hadith, not unlike the Sahih Hadith, last time we said how there are multiple definitions. Similarly, the Hasan Hadith, there are multiple definitions. All of them are very similar to each other. All of them agree that it is similar to a Sahih Hadith, however, it is of a slightly lower level. However, they disagree exactly what that slightly lower level is. So the definition that the novel, the author goes by was المعروف طرق وغدت رجاله لا كالصحيح اشتهرت. So he defines it by two things. First of all, its routes are known, meaning its makharij are known, meaning first of all the chains are connected. It's not a hadith that has disconnected chains and we don't know who a certain narrator is. First of all, we have to know who all the narrators are, and there can't be anonymous narrators. There can't be majahid, which we're going to get to. A majhul narrator is a name, we don't know who he is. So Fulan narrates from Abdullah al-Sulami, for example. Just say a person I made up. You go to the books of biographies, and you look for Abdullah al-Sulami, and you can't find him. You don't know who he is. So a Sahih Hadith can't be like that. Can't have a majhul, an anonymous narrator in it. Similarly, a Hasan Hadith can't have a anonymous narrator. However, رجاله لا كالصحيح اشتهرت. Their men do not have to be as famous as the Sahih Hadith. Last time we went through the conditions of the Sahih narrators. And we said how it has to be someone mu'tamadun fi ضبطه ونقله. He has to be someone who is upright and he is known for good memory, etc., etc. And we went into detail yesterday. So the Hasan narrator, similarly, he can't be a liar, obviously. He can't be known for lying. He can't be an innovator. He has to be a good person. However, he does not have to be as high quality of a narrator as the one in a Sahih Hadith. And this is where the differences in the definition of the Sahih Hadith start to begin. Sorry, the definitions of the Hasan Hadith start to begin. So one of the definitions, which Ibn Salah mentions, is that the Hasan Hadith is the one in which the memory of the narrator is good enough to rely on him, but not as good as the Sahih narrator. So according to one definition, the difference between Hasan and Sahih is only in the memory of the narrator. According to others, it's in both the memory and the uprightness. So both the memory and the uprightness are good enough to rely upon, but not as good, not as upright and famously upright as the Sahih narrators. So you can have a man, a narrator, Fulan al-Fulani. Nobody knows anything bad of him. Nobody's ever seen him do something that is like an open sin. Nobody's ever seen him lie. However, he's also not famous for being a good person. You look at his biographies that the muhaddithin collect, and you see, okay, one person mentions him as reliable. He doesn't go into much detail, and you can't find anything else. You can't find anything bad, but the information on him is limited, and that limited information is good enough. This is what we would call a Hasan narrator. Whereas a Sahih narrator, such as Imam Malik or Imam Shafi'i, not only do we know that they're not public sinners, but we also have extensive biographies of their piety, of their good deeds, of their knowledge, of their religion, etc. So the Hasan hadith is of a slightly shorter uh, or slightly lower quality than the Sahih hadith, but it is not low such that it is bad. It is a Hasan hadith is one that is good. Remember, we said that the word Hasan, it means good. And that's how we can tell what it means. It's a Hasan hadith is a hadith that is good enough to base rulings upon, but it is not as high of a Sahih hadith. Now, there is one hadith collector who throws off a lot of muhaddithin, and it's at-Tirmidhi. Abu Isa at-Tirmidhi, the author of the famous hadith collection, Sunan at-Tirmidhi. Sometimes you will read his hadith, and at the end, you will see him say, هذا حديث حسن صحيح. He will say, this is a hadith that is Hasan Sahih. So, apparently, based off the basic definitions of the Sahih and the Hasan, this seems contradictory. A hadith is either Hasan or it's Sahih. It can't be both. Because we said a Hasan is slightly lower than a Sahih. So how can it be lower than Sahih and also Sahih at the same time? And this is something that the Muhaddithin discuss. And you can, if you're interested, you can go into some of the books that go into this in detail. Basically, there are a few theories out there. One of the theories is that the Hasan Sahih hadith in the Tirmidhi is one that it is Hasan in itself, but there is a similar hadith to it, similar in wording and in meaning, that is Sahih. So you have one narrator narrating something, and then you have another narrator narrating the same thing. One of these chains is Hasan, and one of these chains is Sahih. So you would call that hadith Hasan Sahih. Another definition that has been theorized by Muhaddithin is that the Hasan Sahih hadith is one that is between the ranks of the Hasan and the Sahih. So it is higher than a Hasan hadith and lower than a Sahih hadith. And our point in this discussion is not to settle a debate that has existed for centuries between the Muhaddithin. This is something that exists in at-Tirmidhi. All other Muhaddithin differentiate between Hasan and Sahih. And regardless of what definition you choose, it is obvious that the Hasan Sahih hadith is an accepted hadith. It's not a da'if hadith, so it doesn't affect the ability to use it as evidence. All it affects is, technical academic things that master muhaddithin would want to know. That's a question. So someone asked me, has nobody asked him directly? So nobody ever asked the Tirmidhi? And the question is no. This is something I should mention. The field of Mustalah al-Hadith, which we are studying, it didn't exist the way we know it during the times of the Muhaddithin. So as you guys know, the fiqhi madahib, it didn't exist at the time of the Sahaba. It's something that happens later on. The fiqhi madahibs happen later on to organize what has been narrated from the Sahaba. Similarly, the field of Mustalah al-Hadith was organized later on to organize the sayings of the Muhaddithin. The Muhaddithin between themselves, they kind of knew what they were doing. But later on, a few generations later, when the golden age of Hadith started to come to an end, it became necessary to organize their works and to organize their terminology. And that's when Ibn Salah came with his famous book, the Muqaddimah, in which he arguably was the first person to organize and list the hadith terminologies, at least to a large extent. Some people did this before him to a lesser extent, but he was the first person to really begin this field. So yeah, nobody asked at-Tirmidhi because between him and his students, they kind of knew what he was doing. It's only later on when his work spread to people in different countries and the hadith collections, the canonized, organized hadith collections started to be uh, rewritten and spread out that people, okay, they have some questions about at-Tirmidhi because they didn't meet him in person. So they start to theorize these things. Another interesting thing to know, which we could have mentioned yesterday in the Hadith Sahih section. Uh, Yesterday, I gave you a bit of an example about the differences of the conditions between Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim. I told you that Imam Bukhari, for him, it's a condition that he proves that each narrators actually met. It wasn't enough for him to know that they were contemporary, that they lived in the same time. He actually had to prove that so and so met so and so. He has to have that information. I talked about this yesterday. Interestingly, Al-Imam al-Bukhari doesn't give any information about his conditions. If you read Sahih Muslim, if you open Sahih Muslim, the first page, Sahih Muslim, Imam Muslim gives a long introduction into the science of, not a long, but a good introduction into the science of hadith, and he goes into his conditions and his methodology. This is Imam Muslim in Sahih Muslim. Imam Bukhari, you open a Sahih, it's completely different. It goes, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, حدثنا Abdullah ibn Zubayr al-Humaydi. He doesn't give any information about what his conditions are. So all the conditions we know about al-Bukhari, we don't know about his conditions from him himself. We know it from these people, the hadith scientists, the people knowledgeable in Mustalah hadith. So they looked at his book extensively. They saw every hadith one by one. They compared them and they extrapolated what Bukhari's conditions were. The same way the Fuqaha al-Mujtahideen would extrapolate rulings from the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba. So it's not uncommon for us to theorize things about how the Muhaddithin gave their terminologies. It's not limited to at-Tirmidhi and the Hasan Sahih, which you just mentioned. Sorry, correction. Imam Bukhari says, حدثنا الحميدي عبد الله بن زبير, not Abdullah ibn Zubayr al-Humaydi. But anyways. So continuing, وكل ما عن رتبة الحسن قصر فهو الضعيف وهو أقسام كثر. He says anything that is lower than the grade of al-Hasan, it is ضعيف, and it is many categories. There are many categories of ضعيف. So we said what Sahih is, very simple. We said what Hasan is, very simple. Some details to go into. But al-ضعيف, it's an entirely different story. We have tens and tens of dozens of categories within a ضعيف that we must get into. And the general overarching definition that collects all of the ضعيف definitions is that it's a ضعيف hadith is any hadith that is lower than a hasan. So some hadith are ضعيف, they are weak because there's something wrong in the sanad. Some hadith are weak because there's something wrong in the name of the shaykh. Some hadith are weak because there is a strange word in the method, in the text, that is different from another one. So many different reasons for what a weak hadith is, what can cause a weak hadith. And so the only way to capture all of the weak hadith in one definition is to say that it is any hadith in which it is lower than hasan. وكل ما عن رتبة الحسن قصر فهو الضعيف وهو أقسام الكثر. Anything that falls below the rank of al-Hasan, the good hadith, is weak. Now, the next topic which we're going to get into is the division of a hadith by attribution. There are three ways to attribute a hadith. Attribute a hadith. The first one is marfu', the second one is mawquf, and the third one is maqtu'. So, marfu', mawquf, and maqtu'. Any hadith is going to fall into one of these three. The marfu' hadith, first let's read the line. Where is it? وَمَا أُضِيفَ لِلنَّبِيِّ الْمَرْفُوعُ وَمَا لِتَابِعٍ هُوَ الْمَقْطُوعُ. Anything that is attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So at the end of the hadith, it says, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did, or I saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam do. Anything, any action or saying that is attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is marfu'. And in Arabic, marfu' means raised. Anything that is attributed to a Sahabi. So you read the hadith, and at the very end, it says, I saw Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu do this. I saw Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu say this. Abu Bakr said to me. That is mawquf. And the maqtu' is the same thing for a tabi'i. So I saw Ikrimah, Mawla ibn Abbas, do this. I saw him pray this way. I saw him say this. He said this to me. That is maqtu'. So marfu', the highest one, we call it raised, is the one that is raised to the Prophet. It's attributed to the Prophet, saying or action. Mawquf is a sahabi, and maqtu' is a tabi'i. According to the majority of muhaddithin, the vast majority of muhaddithin, all of these are called hadith. This is called a hadith marfu'. It's a hadith mawquf, hadith maqtu'. So if I give you a hadith mawquf, an attribute, something that is attributed to Umar radiallahu anhu, I'll say this is the hadith of Umar. So this is the majority of muhaddithin. They don't make a difference between them. All of this is called hadith. According to a smaller group who lived in Khurasan, or in English Transoxania, which is a land in farther than Persia, where a lot of muhaddithin were. Sorry, someone was calling me. As I was saying, according to a small group of muhaddithin in Khurasan, the only thing that is called hadith is marfu'. Whereas mawquf and maqtu', they would call them an athar. And so a lot of times you are talking with people, with ignorant people online, and you'll say, look at the hadith in which Umar says, and say, no, you are ignorant, this is an athar. The vast majority of muhaddithin use the word hadith for all three of them. It doesn't have to be attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Anything attributed to a sahabi or a tabi'i is also called a hadith. Now, it is possible for a hadith to be attributed to a sahabi. However, it is in reality a marfu' hadith, a raised hadith. How does this happen? If a sahabi says, for example, someone comes to Umar radiallahu anhu and he asks him about the sunnahs of prayer, or no, let's think of a different example. If someone comes to him and someone comes to Umar radiallahu anhu and asks him for a ruling regarding transactions, commercial transactions. He asks them, is XYZ commercial transaction permissible? Umar radiallahu anhu says, yes, this is permissible. This is a normal mawquf hadith, something attributed to Umar radiallahu anhu. However, if someone comes to Umar radiallahu anhu and he asks him, what is the sunnah in this matter? And Umar radiallahu anhu says, the sunnah in this matter is XYZ. He didn't attribute it to a saying or action of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam directly, but it is implied. If a sahabi says this is a sunnah, then obviously he has this knowledge because he saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam do it. So it is an implied marfu' hadith. Another example, if a sahabi gives knowledge of the unseen, it's not a matter of ijtihad, it's not a matter of fiqhi ruling ijtihad. And it's also not something that he could have narrated from the Israeliyat, from the people of the book. For example, Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu has a famous hadith in which he describes how the Quran came down to the first heaven and then how it came down after that. If you look at that hadith, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, he doesn't attribute it to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He doesn't say the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told me this. However, it's implied because the Sahaba don't have access to the unseen. So if Ibn Abbas is teaching people something from the ghaib, from the unseen, it is implied that this is something the Prophet ﷺ told him. It's something he taught him. And so that hadith, we call it marfu' hukman. It has the ruling of marfu'. That's what marfu' hukman means. So the sanad itself, the chain of narration itself is mawquf. The chain of narration itself ends at the Sahabi, but the ruling of the hadith is that it is attributed to the Prophet ﷺ. So if Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu says, this is from something from the ghaib, or he says, this is from the sunnah. If any Sahabi says, this is from the sunnah, then this is called a marfu' hukman. It has the ruling of a marfu' hadith, even though it is mawquf in reality. Similarly, if a Sahabi says, I used to do this in front of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that is also marfu' hukman. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is obligated by his Lord to relay the truth in all religious matters. And by that obligation, if something incorrect were to happen in front of him, he would be obligated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to tell him this is wrong. So if a Sahabi does something in front of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he doesn't correct him, then it is implied directly that this is permissible. And so if a Sahabi says, I used to do this in front of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he didn't tell me anything, then this is marfu' hukman. Even though it's the Sahabi talking, it is marfu' hukman. The ruling of it is that it is as if the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said it. Because he did it in front, because if the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam were to say something, he would have said it. And because he was silent, this hadith would imply that the Prophet ﷺ accepted this action. So these are some of the examples of the most common ways in which a hadith can be marfu' hukman, but mawquf sanadan. The chain of narration can end at the Sahabi, but the ruling of the hadith is that it ends at the Prophet ﷺ. وما أضيف للنبي المرفوع وما لتابع هو المقطوع. So what's attributed to the Prophet ﷺ is marfu' and what's attributed to the tabi'i is maqtu'. If you guys remember last time, I told you one of the issues with this poem is that it keeps the rhythm, it keeps the flow of the words at the cost of separating related words from each other. So here he mentions marfu' and he mentions maqtu' right here in line 7. He mentions marfu' and he mentions maqtu'. He doesn't mention mawquf. He mentions that later on. And this is because he found it difficult to put all three of them in the same line while keeping the rhythm. And that's why the poem, as we said last time, is disorganized in this matter. But as I told you last time, because I am able to annotate, it will help with some of the confusion. And so we will come over mawquf later on in the poem. I'll give you a brief reminder, but I won't go into it in detail because we went into it now. Like, that's all for now for marfu', mawquf, and maqtu'. Any hadith narrated is going to fall into one of these. Marfu', as we said, it can be marfu' in sanad. The chain of narration can be marfu', or it can have the ruling of marfu' but be mawquf in its chain of narration. Next. والمسند المتصل الإسناد من راويه حتى المصطفى ولم يبن. The next type of hadith we need to know is al-musnad. And the word musnad in Arabic means something that is supported, something that is leaning upon something. If I say سند الرجل على الشجرة, it means the man leaned upon the tree. So a musnad is something that it is lying upon something, it is supported by something. According to the author here, the definition of al-musnad is something that is both connected and marfu'. So we just defined what marfu' is, right? So these are the two conditions of a musnad hadith. It has to be marfu', and the second one is it has to be connected or muttasil, which we're going to get into in a second. A connected hadith is a hadith in which all the narrators are present. A connected hadith is a hadith in which all the narrators are present. So, I can't move it, sorry. So a musnad is marfu' and connected. A chain of narration can be disconnected in many ways. It can be disconnected at the very end of the chain, and we call that mu'allaq. It can be disconnected at the very beginning of the chain, and we call that mursal. Any type of disconnection is not allowed in the musnad hadith, according to this definition. It has to be connected from the very beginning to the very end, which is called muttasil. And it has to be marfu'. It has to be attributed to the Prophet ﷺ. If it has these two conditions, then it is defined as a musnad hadith. This is the definition that the author chose. In reality, if we look at all the definitions of the muhaddithin, there are three definitions for a musnad hadith. According to some muhaddithin, a musnad hadith is equal to a marfu' hadith. So according to some muhaddithin, marfu' and musnad are exchangeable terms. According to some other muhaddithin, a musnad hadith is defined by being connected. So according to this second group of muhaddithin, according to the first group, musnad and marfu' are interchangeable. According to the second group, musnad and connected are interchangeable. According to the third group, which is the group that the author follows, and it is the most common group, musnad is not equally exchangeable with either of them. Musnad is one that contains both of these qualities. So it has to be marfu' and connected. If it's connected, so both of these must be present to fit the definition of musnad according to the definition given by the author of al-Bayquniyya. The only reason I mentioned this difference is because while most modern muhaddithin are going to agree upon this definition, the one he used, if later on you're going to go back into the works of Imam Ahmad and al-Hakim and all these very old muhaddithin, some of them might not follow this definition. So it is very important for the muhaddith to be aware of the differences in the definition so that he does not make a mistake. And again, if you want to go to the full list of the differences of who defined what as what, you can go into the extended works and you can find, an encyclopedic entry into which imam followed which group in this definition. And then when you read said imam's work, you would be able to know if he uses the word musnad, which definition he's referring to. But again, this is far ahead of us. We're still at the very beginning of mustalah. We're still familiarizing ourselves with the agreed upon definitions of the later muhaddithin, Ibn Salah and Ibn Hajar, and those who come after them, and those who follow their definitions until our day today. That's all we have time for today. We have a few minutes for questions. Anyone has any questions, now would be the time. Hopefully related to what we just spoke. about. What is called break in chain at the end? So if the break in the chain is close to the Prophet ﷺ, so the Sahabi isn't mentioned, call that mursal. If it is closer to the narrator, we call it mu'allaq. So if Imam Bukhari doesn't mention his teacher, but he mentions everyone after that, up to the Prophet ﷺ, that's called mu'allaq. And if Imam Bukhari mentions everyone in the chain except the Sahabi, so he mentions everyone until the Tabi'i, and then he jumps to the Prophet ﷺ without mentioning the Sahabi, that's called mursal. And we're going to get into the details of that later. But if you asked, I might as well answer. طيب. Is there any madhab that prefers to call mawquf and that? I'm not sure what you're saying. Okay. I didn't know you could delete messages in Zoom. Okay. Jazakumullah khairan all. Is there any madhab that prefers to call mawquf athar? Okay. Not that I'm aware of. Generally, very few of the Hanabila and very few of the Shafi'is might do that. Very few. No, I don't think any madhab prefers. I don't think any madhab by default does that. It's usually just a few people here and there. It's much more common nowadays amongst the Salafi movement to make that distinction, but I don't think any madhab actually makes that their default position. Jazakumullah khairan all for joining. If anyone has more questions, you're free to message me. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
السلام ورحمة الله، جزاك الله خير.